Most people read the flood story as a tale of divine anger. The world goes wrong, God responds with destruction, and the narrative moves on. But the ancient text does something more subtle than deliver a warning. It presents a vision of the world in which creation is not static but dynamic, capable of correcting itself when thrown out of balance. This is a universe in which existence arises from relationship and is sustained through alignment. When that alignment fails, the collapse that follows is not arbitrary but meaningful. To read Genesis 6:7 only as judgment is to miss what is being shown about how the world holds together. The verse places humanity at the center of the created order, not as a ruler who dominates it, but as a being whose inner orientation either stabilizes or destabilizes everything else. The fate of the earth is not separate from the state of the human being. The two stand or fall together. And this interdependence is not simply moral, it is structural. The story of the flood is therefore not only about what went wrong in the past. It speaks to the deeper question of how creation itself is arranged and how its balance is maintained. The text suggests that the world is shaped by the same forces that can return it to its origin, that creation and uncreation reflect one another, and that the human role is decisive in the continuity between them. Today, we explore that idea. Not to reinterpret the flood as something gentle or symbolic, but to show that the narrative describes a universe that responds coherently to the condition of those who live within it. The verse is not simply recounting a divine decision, it is revealing the structure of being. When we read traditional translations of Genesis 6:7, it sounds like a decree of pure wrath. In the English Standard Version, this verse declares, "So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them." On the surface, it's a grim statement of annihilation, but beneath this surface lies a more intricate pattern, one we uncover by returning to the original language. The source text for this analysis is the Hebrew of the Masoretic tradition, stripped of its vowel points, that is, the consonantal base preserved in the written form of the Tanakh. This layer, sometimes called the Kediv, offers a denser linguistic and symbolic structure. In Hebrew, the consonants carry the core of meaning, and in Genesis 6:7, that consonantal weave encodes not just narrative content but systemic logic. By analyzing the verse at this level, we are able to uncover patterns of relation, movement, and transformation that would be imperceptible in translation alone. Seen through a triadic framework, a lens that treats the verse as a sequence of interlocking three-part structures, Genesis 6:7 becomes something more than a decree of destruction. It reveals a feedback event in the architecture of creation itself. The same principles that shape the world now unfold in reverse, returning creation to its source when its reflective order collapses. In this view, creation and destruction are not opposites, but reciprocal expressions of one coherent system. A cosmos that sustains itself by maintaining balance and corrects itself by unraveling imbalance. Before diving in, note that in the original Hebrew text, a tiny word, et, spelled with the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, aleph and tav, appears before the man. This word functions as an integrative hinge, hinting that everything that follows is encompassed from beginning, aleph, to end, tav. In other words, the subsequent parts of the verse are echoes of the same overarching pattern applied to reality in different scales and contexts. Each triad we examine is therefore like a fractal, a self-similar application of the verse's core principle on a different scale. Now let's journey through each triad in sequence. The first triad provides the keynote of the entire analysis. Here we are tracing how the act of speaking, the identity of the speaker, and the event set in motion by that speech are inseparably bound. What sounds at first like a stark decree is, under this lens, a single movement in which word and world coincide. That is why I summarize the arc this way. Being speaks its own unmaking. In other words, when God speaks the undoing, the speech is not commentary about reality, but the very medium by which reality folds back upon itself. With that in view, Consider how Genesis 6:7 begins, "And the Lord said, I will blot out." In this brief clause, we are given a complete triad, the speech, the speaker, and the erasing, already fused into one field of action. The structure is not merely literary, it is ontological. The creative word and the destructive act are not opposing forces, but a single flow moving in reverse, a self-correcting current in the stream of being. First, take the verb vayomer, he said, which is the ignition point of the motion. Even in its anglicized form, we can hear the progression embedded in its root amar. That root steps through three-letter figures. Aleph, Mem, Resh. Aleph signifies origin or breath, an unvoiced inception, the poised intake before articulation. Mem evokes water and flow, the movement of content from source into channel. Resh names a head or tip, the outward thrust toward a definitive edge or direction. So Amar carries a three-beat rhythm: origin, flow, outward expression. In Vayomer, that rhythm becomes an event. Intention passes through the channel and arrives as an uttered word. For the discerning ear, hear it like this: Aleph is the silent intake, Mem is the carrying wave, Resh is the strike of the tongue at the lip of action. By foregrounding Vayomer, the text signals that we are not observing an idea about unmaking, but the audible onset of unmaking itself. Second, attend to the speaker, Yahweh, the divine name. We can hear in the sequence of its letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, an unfolding that both advances and returns, like existence inhaling and exhaling itself. Yod points, initiating, He opens, Vav binds or pins what is above to what is below. He opens again as though the name breathes its own life. In other words, the name is not a static label, but a pattern of self-sustaining being, an iterative pulse that holds creation in the present continuous. When this being speaks, the speech does not depart from the one who utters it. The utterance is an extension of the name's own living sequence. Think of Yahweh as existence speaking, the agency whose identity is constitutively expressed in world-making, and therefore in world unmaking as an act of judgment that is still consistent with that identity. Third, consider the promised act, Emsheh, I will blot out, erase, which draws on the root matcha. Its letters, Mem, Chet, He, compose an image you can almost feel. Mem is fluid motion, the saturating medium. Chet is a fence or membrane, a structured boundary. He is an opening, the moment of disclosure. Put the sequence together, and you get water pressing through a boundary until it yields, and what lay hidden is laid bare. This is not erasure by abrasion, but by dissolution. Ink washed from parchment, a sandcastle liquefied by surf. Emsheh thus names uncreation by release. The structures that held forms in place are open to the flood of what is prior and beneath. Now place these three together and listen to how they sound as one. The speaking begins, Vayomer, the speaker is the living name, Yahweh, and the spoken act is a dissolving unmaking, Emsheh. There is no gap in that movement. In Genesis 6:7, God's speech is deed, articulation is execution. The moment the word is sounded, the current of reversal is already running. Reality, which came forth via speech, here folds itself back by speech in a single seamless continuum. To put it plainly for the ear, the declarative I will blot out is performative, the sentence itself is the switch. From this, we can formulate the constant pattern the triad encodes. At the root, agency and act are identical. Who acts, the divine being, what is done, the decree, and how it is accomplished. The self-expressive word mirror each other because they are expressions of the same source. Whenever true being articulates, the articulation is reality. That is why creation and destruction are not contraries in two rival powers. They are two directions of one voice. In the forward direction, the voice shapes and sustains. In the reverse, the same voice releases and reveals. Either way, articulation is power. This also clarifies the counterfactual negation or failure mode. Suppose speech were detachable from the speaker's being or from the state of the world. Suppose words were merely signals about things, not the event that makes them so. Then an utterance like "I will blot out" would await an external mechanism, a delay, a bureaucracy of forces, a chain of causes that might fail or falter. Unmaking would be tentative and partial, mediated by contingency. But the verse presents no such delay. The feedback loop is instant because the utterance is the act. If this unity did not hold, the decree could be suspended, negotiated, or diluted. Here it is certain, encompassing, and immediate precisely because speech and world are one fabric in the mouth of the divine. Finally, allow this opening triad to set our trajectory. The cosmos, in this reading, is spoken into form and spoken out of form by the same mouth. That is the keynote we will keep sounding as we move inward. Having heard the performative word of unmaking, we will now trace how that word travels through creation. First, at the human register, where recognition of the source either sustains or collapses order. Then through the layered structure of the world as what is above is withdrawn and the below is exposed. Then across the web of living kinds, as corruption propagates, and outward to the heavens, so that no realm sits outside the single reason. Each of those developments is, in fact, a scaled echo of this first movement, like fractal reprises within the Aleph to Tav totality, because the initial triad already showed us the rule. The speaker, the speech, and the outcome are one continuous process. Having seen that creation and uncreation flow from the same divine speech, we now turn to the role humanity plays in the stability of that creation. This first triad on the human plane shows that the world is upheld by a feedback loop between the human being and the divine source. In other words, creation continues to cohere because humanity reflects the one who made it. The human being is not simply one creature among others, but the conscious mirror that stabilizes the entire order. If the mirror turns away, the order loses its orientation. The heart of this triad is the insight that humanity sustains creation through its own reflection. When human beings recognize and honor their source, creation is affirmed. When that recognition fails, creation begins to unravel. The verse phrase here is, "the human whom I have created." And contained within it are three elements that together form the cycle: humanity itself, the relation of recognition, and the creative act that brought humanity into being. The first term is ha'adam, the human. If we look at the components of the word Adam, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, we see a profound image. Aleph signifies spirit or origin, the divine breath. Dalet is a doorway or threshold. Mem is water, substance, the flowing medium of material life. So the word Adam portrays the movement of spirit entering through the doorway into matter, spirit embodied, divine breath carried into the physical world. Humanity is thus positioned as the point of meeting between heaven and earth, a being who spans both realms. The second term is Asher, often translated simply as whom or that, but in Hebrew functioning as a relational hinge. Its letters, Aleph, Shin, Resh, trace a motion. Aleph, the originating source. Shin, transformation, energy, the movement that changes form. Resh, direction, the head or guiding point. So Asher expresses source passing through transformation toward orientation. In lived terms, Asher represents recognition, the human turning back to acknowledge its source. It names relationship, humanity in conscious reference to God. This is why I call it the hinge. It is the mirror motion by which humanity reflects the divine. The third term is barati, I have created. Here we return to the root bara, spelled bet, resh, aleph. Bet is a house or container. Resh, once again, is ordering, structuring, direction. Aleph is the originating breath. So bara means to structure the origin into form, to house the source in ordered being. Barati, I created, names the completed act of giving existence, the formed world, the created order in which humanity stands. Now, when we place these three together, Ha'adam, Asher, Barati, we see a self-reinforcing cycle. Humanity comes forth from the divine source into embodied existence. Humanity is capable of recognizing that source. When we do recognize, when we enact Asher, the turning of the face back to the origin, that recognition stabilizes creation. It is as though the light that comes from God must be returned to God in order for the world to hold its shape. The cycle is source, reflection, stability. Humanity reflects God. That reflection affirms and sustains the created order, and the created order then supports the continued life of the human being. The world is upheld because the mirror is turned toward the light. This triad therefore encodes the principle that recognition sustains reality. When the conscious creature remembers where its life comes from, creation holds together in coherence and goodness. While the language is theological, the principle is structural. Relationship to the source is the integrity of the whole. The negation in this triad begins when we no longer recognize our origin. The sequence that should sustain creation, human reflection, relational coherence, structured form, is broken at its center. Without that act of recognition, the relation loses tension, and the structure it once supported begins to erode. If we do not reflect the source, we cannot mediate its presence. If we do not mediate that presence, the created order we participate in becomes unstable. This is not just moral drift, it's ontological decay. We cease to reinforce the very system that gives us identity, and in doing so, we become agents of its unraveling. The triad collapses because the cycle no longer closes. Being no longer reflects itself in us, and so its structure cannot hold. The lesson is plain. When recognition fails, reinforcement reverses, and what was once sustained begins to unmake itself, starting with us. Of course, the narrative of Genesis tells us that this recognition has failed before. In the generations before the flood, humanity ceased to see itself as the image of God. The mirror clouded, the feedback loop weakened. The human being ceased to reflect the one who gives life. And once that link breaks, the created order begins to lose its coherence. This is why the text later says, "The earth was corrupt before God." It is not only human behavior that dissolves, the world itself begins to destabilize because the relational hinge that holds it together is no longer functioning. It is precisely this breakdown of recognition that leads the verse to transition toward unmaking. If the recognition cycle sustained creation, then its collapse initiates creation's reversal. So having shown us that the sustaining mirror has failed, the text now proceeds to the next triad, where the undoing begins to cascade through the layered structure of the world itself. We will now watch creation peel back, layer by layer, revealing what lies beneath the visible surface. Having seen that creation is sustained by humanity's reflective relationship to its source, we now observe what unfolds when that reflective relation fails. The unmaking does not occur all at once. The text presents it as a descending movement, an unraveling that proceeds layer by layer. We can think of this as creation unwinding in reverse order from how it emerged. Where creation moved from the deep into form and life, here the process runs backward. Form yields to exposure, and exposure yields to dissolution. The key insight of this triad is that unmaking happens in layers. The undoing of the world is not depicted as a sudden disappearance, but as a methodical withdrawal of support from above, revealing what lies beneath each stratum of being. It is a peeling, a lifting away, a disclosure. The phrase carrying this triad is, "From upon the face of the ground, me'al pene ha'adamah." These three elements, removal from above, exposure of the surface, and return to foundational earth, form the steps of descent. The first term is me'al, meaning from upon or off of. This word initiates the downward motion. Its structure contains mem, which suggests flowing movement or liquid, and the cluster al, ayin lamd, which conveys upon or above. Together, they signal a kind of lifting away from what once rested above. One might imagine a covering layer, a protective canopy, being withdrawn. In the symbolic imagination of Genesis, this is not merely a physical ceiling, but a metaphysical one, the sustaining grace or ordering breath that rested upon creation. To say me'al is to say that the upper support is now being lifted. It marks the point where the dissolution begins, not with violence, but with withdrawal. The second term is pene, face, surface, or exposed presence. The letters here, pe, an open mouth or opening, nun, continuity or animating life, and yod, a hand, a point of directed action, suggest the surface as an open plane through which the flow of life expresses itself. When the covering from above is removed, the pene, the face of the earth, becomes bare, unshielded, visible in its vulnerability. This is the world we inhabit, the exposed interface between the heavens and the deep. In this triad, pene marks the moment of exposure. Something that was previously held in place or protected is now revealed to the elements. The third term is ha'adama, the ground or the earth, which forms the foundation of the created world. The word Adama contains the human word Adam, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, and adds a final He. This He often signals outward manifestation or full-formedness. Where Adam is embodied spirit, Adama is the material matrix that receives and supports life. The ground is what remains when the covering layers are peeled away. When the surface is exposed, what lies beneath is the raw earth itself, a foundational substrate that, without ordering spirit, tends toward the primordial waters. In other words, Ha'adama is the last layer before creation collapses back into the undifferentiated deep. When we place these three together, Me'al, Pene, Ha'adama, we can hear the motion, removal to exposure to foundation. Once the upper layer is withdrawn, the surface stands bare, and once the surface stands bare, the foundation is revealed. This is the structure of unraveling. The sequence is causal, logical, and inevitable. Remove the shelter from above, and what was sheltered is disclosed. Expose the surface, and the ground beneath comes into view. The text is showing us how unmaking cascades, not instantly, but as a progressive unveiling. This pattern encodes an enduring principle. Unmaking is ordered. Even divine destruction is structured. It is not chaos, but the return to what lies beneath form. Negation removes in order to reveal. The higher is withdrawn first, the surface is left exposed, and the foundation stands alone. This is why, in the flood, the waters rise, not as an intrusion, but as a return. The earth is being taken back to its pre-creation state where the deep covered everything. Now we can see the link to the previous triad. If humanity had sustained the reflective relationship to its source, the upper shelter would remain. The mirror would continue to receive and return light. The protective order would hold. But once recognition collapses, the covering is withdrawn. The world is left exposed, and the unraveling begins. The negation in this triad occurs when we resist the rupture. If the initial motion is denied, if negation does not begin, then the deeper structures remain hidden. The triad is causal. Withdrawal reveals surface, surface discloses depth. But if we deny the first term, the entire sequence collapses. The surface stays sealed, and the corruption beneath persists unseen. This is how injustice festers under appearances, when we cannot or will not disrupt the forms that conceal deeper disorder. Without negation, the causal descent halts, and nothing is clarified. In a world where things look fine on the surface, we may interpret stability as health. But this triad warns us otherwise. The refusal to expose is the refusal to heal. If we negate negation itself, the process of unmaking becomes impossible to map, and so impossible to repair. This leads us naturally to the next stage of the text. If the layers of creation are being peeled back, then the living beings who inhabit those layers will be affected accordingly. The next triad will show how the cascade of unmaking moves through the living world, not simply downward but outward, amplifying, multiplying, spreading. Now that we have seen the layered unraveling of creation's structure, we turn to the living world itself. The text now shows us how the collapse spreads not simply downward in a tidy sequence, but across life in a way that is diffuse, resonant, and nonlinear. This triad illustrates that when humanity, the steward placed at the relational center of creation, falls out of harmony with the source, the disturbance does not stay contained. It ripples, it jumps tiers, It spreads through every order of living beings. The key insight here is that a broken humanity sends shockwaves through the entire web of life. The failure of the highest part of creation compromises the integrity of the whole. The language in Genesis 6:7 expresses this with the sequence, from humanity to the beasts to the creeping things. Me Adam ad behema ad remus. These are not simply three categories listed. They form the articulation of a systemic cascade. The first term is me Adam, from the human. The root Adam we have already studied. Aleph, Dalet, Mem, the divine breath entering matter through the threshold of embodiment. But here, the prefix Mem marks origin or emanation, from the human, out of the human. The corruption that drives the unmaking originates at the human level. It begins in the steward. Human violence, moral collapse, and relational severance from God constitute the initiating shock. It is not that animals misbehaved and so must be punished. Rather, the break begins with us and radiates outward. Me Adam marks the epicenter. The second term is ad behema, unto the beasts. The word ad carries the sense of up to the full extent, a span or range being crossed. It signals that what emerged in humanity now reaches the realm of the animals, those embodied lives that share the surface of the earth with us. The word behema, bet, he, mem, he, evokes the image of breath enclosed in material form, life animated and moving in the world. So this phrase indicates that the shock initiated in the human being has now permeated all higher animals. It is a relational spillover. The disruption in the steward disorients what is stewarded. The third term is ad remes, under the creeping thing. Again, it indicates extension, continuation, spread. Remes, resh mem shin, evokes creatures that move close to the ground, the smallest, the subtle, the nearly invisible life that crawls. The letters themselves imply movement through a medium. Mem, guided by direction. Resh, with shin suggesting varied contact or dispersion. In other words, Remes names the microscale domain of life, the lowest, the least empowered. By extending the cascade here, the text is saying, the corruption reaches everything. Nothing is insulated. Now when we hear these terms in sequence, me Adam, ad behema, ad remes, the rhythm of the words is significant. The repeated adaub ad signals a spreading ripple. This is not a simple linear descent, it is propagation across interconnected strata. The movement is systemic rather than sequential, and the system is alive. This is the unity of the triad. A disturbance introduced at the human level does not merely trickle downward, it radiates. The creatures do not merely suffer because of external punishment. They are entangled with humanity in a shared web of being. Their fates are linked to ours. This is why Genesis later says, all flesh had corrupted its way. Verse 6:12. The text does not mean that bugs suddenly committed crimes. It means the relational order had collapsed. The tuning fork that kept life resonating in harmony, humanity reflecting the divine, was no longer vibrating. The resulting dissonance reverberated through the entire field of life. The constant principle here is interdependence. When the apex consciousness of a system misaligns, the system destabilizes. In ecological terms, this is a trophic cascade originating at the apex species. In moral terms, it is stewardship failing and taking the innocent with it. In spiritual terms, it is the image bearer turning away from the image and the world falling out of tune. The negation in this triad begins when we deny that the disturbance begins with us. This is a non-linear triad. Human corruption jumps scales affecting animal life and ground-level vitality. But the causal sequence still matters. If there is no perturbation at the human level, the animal continuum is not driven toward collapse. Negating the source term, ourselves, severs our sense of responsibility, but not the actual connection. The system still responds, corruption still spreads, but we no longer see its point of origin, and so we lose our capacity to intervene. When we pretend the system is breaking on its own, we forfeit the role of restoration. In this triad, our presence is not optional, it is determinative. If we destabilize, the rest follows. If we refuse to admit this, The cascade accelerates in ignorance. The moral weight here is sharp. The living world does not unravel independently of us, only with us or because of us. If the human being held its relational alignment, the animals would remain stable. The web would hold. The disturbance would not propagate. This is why, after the flood, God resets the relationship and explicitly reestablishes the hierarchy in Genesis 9:2. The system must be retuned, so we now see the collapse is not merely structural, it is biological, ecological, existential. Humanity's failure becomes the world's unraveling, and this brings us to the threshold of the next movement. If the layers of the earth have been exposed and all living beings on the earth are swept into the collapse, the only remaining question is whether any realm remains untouched. The next clause of the verse will show us that even the heavens, the birds, the sky, are drawn into the same process. There is no outside to the story. Creation rises and falls together. Once the text has traced the unraveling of creation across the layers of earth and the orders of living beings, it does not stop there. It lifts the motion upward into the realm of height and vision. The clause moves us to the edge of the visible world, and even up to the bird of the heavens. Here the decree touches not only the life that crawls or walks, but the life that ascends, the life that flies set against the sky. The upward movement itself is meaningful. The little connective phrasing that carries us even to v-ad marks a widening gesture. It signals that the decree does not pause until it has reached the highest form of creaturely presence accessible to human awareness. There is an arc being drawn, from the soil to the land animals to the conscious human, and now to the bird. Every step rises, and the bird here, is not only biological category but cultural symbol. The ancient world consistently treated the creatures of the air as those who see from above and voice from above, messengers, omens, bearers of vantage that human feet cannot attain. Even in the internal structure of the Hebrew word there is the feeling of this: the eye that perceives, the link that joins, the mouth that speaks. It is not that the word bird means something else. Rather, the bird already was a living image of heightened perception united to expression, the creature who moves between realms and calls across them. It crowns the animal orders because it occupies the open air, where sight is panoramic and voice carries far. Then comes the naming of the heavens, Hashamayim, the great expanse that holds the bird's movement. This is not merely the sky as backdrop, but the entire atmospheric frame in which perspective itself is formed. To speak of the heavens alongside the bird is to acknowledge that the very medium in which thought, vision, and orientation take place is implicated. The world is not only losing balance in the soil and the flesh, it is losing clarity in the air, in the domain that corresponds to sense-making and direction. Read this way: the triad unfolds as a progression from action to awareness to worldview. The decree reaches the bird, and with it the idea of elevation, of the possibility of seeing the world as a whole. Then, in naming the heavens, it touches the very conditions that make heightened sight possible. In ancient symbolic grammar, the bird and the heavens together mark the region of ascension, enlightenment, and salvation, the movement in which the human being lifts consciousness toward the divine, sees rightly, speaks truly, and orients life in alignment with ultimate reality. What the verse suggests, by including these, is that this movement too has collapsed. Ascension is no longer pure ascent. Enlightenment is no longer clear sight. Salvation is no longer assured by simply looking upward. These three, rising, understanding, being made whole, are not separate tasks. They depend on one another. The ascent of consciousness requires clarity of seeing. Clarity of seeing must culminate in right orientation, and right orientation is the condition in which the soul recognizes its responsibility in creation. Where perception is distorted, ascent becomes misguided. Where orientation falters, the language of salvation becomes incoherent. And where the heavens themselves reflect disorder, the one who seeks to rise finds no guiding star. Thus, the mention of the bird and the heavens is not an incidental detail of the destruction list. It is a recognition that the failure has reached the level of vision and meaning itself. Creation is not merely broken in its bodies and soils. It is broken in its capacity to see, interpret, and aspire. The order of life that should have risen toward wisdom now turns in confusion. The sky itself, once the field of orientation, will soon open in judgment. The symbolic ladder that once connected earth to God through perception has warped. Therefore, the story must now turn to the heart of God, where the reason for the resetting of the world is about to be spoken. The narrative has traced the decline outward and downward. Now it has traced it upward and inward. All planes are accounted for. The world has nowhere left to turn but into the grief and resolve of the one who made it. The negation in this triad begins when we sever the cause that binds heaven, creatures, and cosmos. If we remove the inclusive rationale, the because that draws upper and lower together, then we are left with domains that no longer communicate. The birds perish, the heavens fracture, but no shared meaning remains to interpret the loss. The triad's form requires convergence at the level of cause. Birds point to heaven, heaven reveals reason, reason enfolds them both. Negate that cause, and the terms fall into disjunction. The warning here is epistemic. Once we separate divine rationale from cosmic consequence, we no longer know how to interpret what happens. Events feel random, judgment feels arbitrary. But this disorder is not divine, it is structural, and we authored it by fragmenting a logic meant to unify. The world can only be read truthfully when its parts remain connected. Sever the connective and the world appears incoherent even when it is not. And so the clause brings us to the threshold of the divine interior. Having gathered earth and sky under one explanation, the text now turns us from the scope of the decree to the heart behind it. The next movement will articulate that heart directly and show how divine sorrow and divine action join, not as two impulses in competition, but as one motion aimed at rectifying a world out of tune. Now we come to the final movement of the verse, where the text turns inward into the heart of the divine action itself. The statement, "For I regret that I have made them," has often been read in overly human emotional terms, as though it depicted God vacillating, changing his mind, or feeling disappointed. But the Hebrew phrasing does not suggest instability or surprise. What is being described is a necessary internal motion that belongs to the very structure of creation itself. The word translated as "I regret," nichamti, comes from a root that means not just sorrow, but reflective reevaluation, an inward turning of awareness. Its letters suggest life encountering its own boundary, pausing, and then flowing again in a new direction. This is not regret as emotional turmoil. It is regret as recognition. Recognition that what exists now no longer reflects what it was meant to hold. It is clarity, not confusion. Creation by its very nature brings form into motion, and once form is in motion, it reveals what it is. To create is to allow what is potential to become actual, and once it has become actual, it may need to be evaluated and corrected. So regret is not opposed to creation. It arises from creation. It is the second half of the creative arc. It is creation seeing itself. This is why the tiny word "ki," that, is so important. It binds the regret directly to the act of making. I regret that I made them. The regret is not about creation in general, nor about some separate matter. It is about the specific form creation has taken here and now. This little connective word prevents us from pulling regret and creation apart. The one belongs to the other. Without creation, there could be no regret. And without the capacity for regret, creation would be static, unreflective, unable to address distortion. In other words, the very possibility of growth, renewal, and purification depends on this link. The divine is not acting in contradiction to itself. It is acting in fidelity to its own nature. When God says, "I made them," asitum, this is the act of forming, shaping, giving structure. The root of asa emphasizes intention expressed as form, seeing, transforming, revealing. God is recalling not simply that something came into existence, but that it came into existence through divine purpose. Creation is personal, deliberate, relational, and because of that, when creation becomes misaligned, the same intentionality that made it responds to that misalignment. Correction is not an intrusion. It is the continuation of creation by another means. The act of unmaking is not the negation of creation. It is creation restoring itself to truth. So the motion in this triad is not first God made, then God regretted, and then God changed course. The motion is creation unfolds, creation is observed, creation is corrected. These are not three separate events. They are one continuous breath. The sorrow is not external to the making. It is the awareness that arises because the making is real and alive. The flood, then, is not an outburst of divine frustration, nor the erasure of a failed project, but the necessary purification of a form that no longer embodies its purpose. Nothing about it is arbitrary. The sorrow is real, but it is not helpless sorrow. It is sorrow that moves toward restoration. This is a pattern visible in all living processes. Wherever creation is genuine, there must be reflection. Wherever reflection is genuine, there will be the recognition of misalignment. And wherever misalignment is truly recognized, change follows. Regret is not the sign of failure, it is the evidence of care. If this connective motion did not exist, creation would accumulate distortion endlessly, or correction would arrive without meaning or coherence. Instead, the text shows us a world whose creator sees, evaluates, and responds, not in divided impulses, but in one unified act of fidelity to the good. The negation in this triad begins when the connective between inner sorrow and outer act is blocked. Regret and creation are meant to move together. God's emotional response and his creative act are joined by a hinge, for, or because. But when that hinge fails, when we separate intention from execution, or emotion from transformation, then both ends lose coherence. If divine regret no longer touches divine action, then judgment becomes mechanical. If divine action no longer expresses divine grief, then it becomes cold. The triad collapses, not because one term disappears, but because they lose their mutual reference. And in our own lives, the same pattern applies. When we act without feeling or feel without acting, we distort both. Creation and correction cannot become adversaries. The hinge must hold. If it breaks, the system still moves, but it no longer moves in truth. So the verse is not telling us that God changed his mind about creation. It is telling us that creation itself contains the movement that allows it to be brought back into alignment. The divine regret is the world being seen truly. The unmaking that follows is the world being guided back toward integrity. Creation and regret are not opposites. They are the forward step and the necessary inward step of the same motion of being. At this stage in the verse, we have already heard the full scope of the undoing in our constructed translation from the pre-Masoretic Hebrew. I will blot out the human being whom I have created from the face of the ground, from the human to the beast, to the creeping thing, and up to the bird of the heavens, for I regret that I have made them. The language of the text has already enumerated humanity, the earth, and every living creature within it. Now, we step back and recognize that these are not isolated pieces being listed one after another. They form a single interdependent whole, three voices in what was meant to be a harmonious chord. Humanity is the first voice in that chord. Earlier we saw that the human being Ha-Adam is formed from the earth yet carries the breath of God. Humanity was meant to act as the conscious mirror of creation, turning toward its source and reflecting divine intention into the world. In Genesis chapter 1, this is expressed as stewardship, naming, tending, cultivating, blessing. When that reflective relationship is intact, humanity sets the key of the entire system. Human meaning-making, perception, and moral orientation shape the entire tone of the created world. When the human being recognizes God, the world resonates with coherence. When that recognition fails, the resonance warps. The second voice is the earth itself, the structured world of layers and stability. Recall from the earlier triad the phrase from upon the face of the ground, Me'al pene ha-adama. The earth has a surface, a depth, and an order. It is the platform on which life takes shape, the environment in which meaning can be lived. In Genesis chapter 1, the earth is described as good and fruitful. In Genesis chapter 6, we hear instead that the earth was corrupt before God and the earth was filled with violence. The earth reflects the state of the human being because the human being is the one who inhabits, shapes, and uses it. So the earth is not passive. It is resonant. When humanity is aligned, the earth is blessed. When humanity is distorted, the earth absorbs the distortion. The third voice is the community of living creatures, the animals, the beasts, the creeping things, and the birds of the heavens. In Genesis chapter 1, these creatures teem, swarm, soar. They fill the world in balanced vitality. They are expressions of life responding to the conditions set by the earth and shaped by humanity's behavior toward them. We saw in Triad 3 that when humanity becomes corrupt, the disturbance spreads outward into the entire web of life. It does not simply trickle, it ripples. The text captures this with that repeating rhythm of extension, from the human to the beast to the creeping thing, even to the bird of the heavens. Life reflects what humanity and the earth are doing. When human violence multiplies, the living world becomes disordered. When humanity ceases to reflect God, creation ceases to reflect harmony. So what we are seeing in this triad is the recognition that these three, humanity, earth, and the community of life, are not separate systems. They are one system expressed in three complementary registers. In the ideal creation of Genesis chapter 1, these three sounded together as a major chord: humanity conscious of God, the earth stable and fruitful, life flourishing in abundance. But in the world of Genesis chapter 6, they are still sounding together, only now the chord is dissonant. The very same interconnectedness that once amplified goodness now amplifies distortion. Humanity falls out of recognition. The earth loses its stability. Life becomes corrupted. The system has not fractured. It has resonated in the wrong key. The negation in this triad begins when the interdependent fields, human, earth, and life, fall out of resonance. In the affirmative mode, each reinforces the other. Human integrity sustains land, land sustains life, life returns the chord. But when one tone drops, say we act in violation of our role, the resonance does not stop. It reverses. The very same structure that once carried harmony now carries collapse. The negation of one term does not isolate the damage, it propagates it. If we lose coherence in one dimension, the others will soon bear that distortion. The danger of a harmonic triad is that it amplifies whatever passes through it. So if the world feels as if everything is breaking at once, it may be because it is. But that amplification is also opportunity. If one voice can destroy, one voice can retune. The resonance works both ways. This is why the flood cannot be understood as punishment in a narrow sense. It is the only possible response available within a world that is truly interconnected. When one note is out of tune, the entire harmony is altered. You cannot fix the dissonance by adjusting one piece in isolation. If humanity, earth, and life act as one chord, then the only way to restore harmony is to stop the chord entirely and retune. This is the tragedy the verse shows us, not randomness, not anger, but a broken harmony moving as one. Humanity falls, and the earth and its creatures fall with it, not because they are being punished as separate entities, but because they are one field of resonance. They rise together and they fall together. Understanding this prepares us for the final and culminating triad. For now, the narrative is ready to show how this lower harmony, the chord of humanity, earth, and life, aligns with the higher plane, the heavens, and the divine intention itself in a single convergence, completing the arc that began with, "And the Lord said." Now that we have traced the resonance of the lower world, humanity, the earth, and the living creatures, we reach the final movement, where the whole scene widens and draws everything together. Genesis chapter 6 verse 7 has brought us to the point where God declares the undoing of creation. "I will blot out the human being whom I have made from upon the face of the ground, from man to beast to creeping thing and to the bird of the heavens, for I regret that I have made them." And as this pronouncement stands, something larger begins to gather behind it. The text is preparing us not simply for an earthly catastrophe, but for a convergence of heaven, earth, and the divine will itself. To see this clearly, we place three major realities beside one another. First, the state of the lower creation, the world of human beings, soil, and living creatures, now resonating in dissonance as we described previously. Everything below has become a single field of disharmony. Second, the realm above, the heavens, Hashamayim, the great arch of sky and cosmic order, which until now has been distinct from what happens below. And third, the divine interior, God's own will and recognition, the sorrow that has already declared itself as Nichamti, I regret. When the flood arrives, all three of these cease to stand apart. Heaven and earth, which were separated in Genesis chapter 1 when God divided the waters above from the waters below, now move toward one another again. The text will soon say that all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The waters from above and the waters from below meet. The boundary between heaven and earth collapses. The world that had been held open, stretched wide between divine transcendence and terrestrial habitation, now folds inward toward unity. At the same time, the divine will, God's recognition of what creation has become, infuses the event, not as mere force, but as meaning. God's sorrow and God's action are one motion. The unmaking is not performed in anger, but in coherence. The world is being returned to a state where it can be made again. In the beginning, the world came forth from formless water. Now, in its broken state, it returns to that water. The flood does not erase the world into nothingness. It returns it to its elemental beginning, the silent deep described in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. This is closure, not annihilation. The circuit is completing itself. We might say that everything which had come to stand apart now reunites. The heavens and the earth, which had stretched across a vast distance, come together. The moral, emotional motion in God's heart becomes identical with the motion of the waters. The human world and the natural world no longer diverge, they fall together. Every level of reality participates in one unified act. The convergence is total, and this totality is crucial to the meaning of the story. If any layer had remained independent, if heaven withheld its waters, or the deep remained sealed, or if God's regret did not flow into action, the cycle would have remained open. The disharmony would have continued without resolution, but nothing resists. The deep gives, the sky gives, and the decree moves through creation without friction. The story describes a cosmos in which every part, from the highest to the lowest, still responds to the one who called it into being. Even in collapse, the world is obedient. This is why the flood is not simply destruction, it is restoration by return. The world returns to its origin so that it may emerge again. The convergence is the pivot between worlds. What was can end, and what will be can begin. And it is necessary to understand this verse, not as condemnation, but as a divine promise of restoration, in order to reveal the final negation. The negation in this triad begins when one domain withdraws from participation in the whole. Convergence requires all three axes, heaven, earth, and divine will, to carry and contain each other. If anyone resists inclusion, the system cannot close. This is not a pause, it is a drift. The triad requires mutual implication. Heaven points to earth responds to heaven. Both are enfolded in divine will. But if one turns away, if heaven is ignored, if the earth is denied, if divine intention is excluded, then the circuit remains open. Creation cannot correct itself without its parts agreeing to be rejoined. This final negation is the most serious because it blocks the resolution of the entire system. Reunification fails. Correction remains partial. We continue to live inside a breach. The triad reminds us that no one domain can restore the world alone. It must be done together, or not at all. When the waters subside, the first thing we see is not chaos, but potential. A dove sent out over the deep, a branch returned, a mountaintop emerging from water. The old chord has been silenced, so a new chord may sound. The triadic cycle that began with creation, speech, form, reflection, has now closed. The next cycle will begin on cleaner ground, carried forward by Noah, who is not exempt from the world's resonance, but is positioned to begin tuning it anew. Thus the verse does not conclude with despair, but with the quiet of a world held again in God's hands, waiting to be spoken into order a second time. This verse is not only remembering something that once happened, it is revealing something that always happens when the same alignment of conditions is present. Genesis is not simply telling us what was, It is showing us what is and what will be so long as the same relationships hold. The pattern begins in the same place every time, with the connection between humanity and its source. When human beings remember that they are bearers of a divine image, creation holds together. When they forget, when the mirror dims, the world begins to lose its coherence. The soil loses its blessing. Relationships fracture. Society destabilizes. The web of life reacts. The change does not begin outside. It begins in the interior of human consciousness. The environment simply echoes what the heart has become. So the first prophecy of this verse is that the state of the world will always reflect the clarity or distortion of the human heart. When the image is remembered, the world becomes orderly and life-giving. When the image is forgotten, the world becomes confused and turbulent. The earth and humanity rise and fall together. The second prophecy is that collapse does not arrive all at once. It unfolds in layers, just as creation was layered, heaven above, earth beneath, waters below. When the sustaining above is withdrawn, society finds itself exposed, then the structures beneath begin to erode, and finally we reach a return to the formless. This is not random ruin, it is simply the structure of creation running in reverse. It is the system seeking equilibrium. When disharmony becomes too great, the world resets to a state where new order can be formed. The third prophecy is that corruption does not stay confined to the place where it begins. When the steward of the world misaligns, the effects ripple outward through life. Families, communities, nations, ecosystems. The smallest creatures are touched by the condition of the human heart, not because they are guilty, but because life is interwoven. Where one thread frays, the tapestry responds. The fourth prophecy is that no realm is exempt. The sky, the symbolic realm of meaning, culture, and spirit, what a people believes, what a civilization imagines itself to be, will shift in response to the condition of human consciousness. Birds of the heavens fall when the heavens themselves grow dim. Humanity does not merely inhabit the world, it tunes the world. If the tuning changes, the atmosphere of existence changes too. The fifth prophecy is that divine regret is not anger, it is recognition. It is the moment when what has become incompatible with goodness is seen clearly. And recognition always calls forth correction. When God regrets, it signals a turning, a reorientation toward restoring what is real, true, and worthy. In human experience, this corresponds to collective conscience awakening. We see what we have allowed, and we cannot unsee it. Correction follows, not because we are punished, but because we cannot continue as we are. The sixth prophecy is that human beings, the earth and the living world form a single chord. If the chord is in tune, creation flourishes. If the chord is dissonant, the world vibrates with strain. The correction is not the removal of the chord, it is the retuning of it. Every civilization, every generation, every soul experiences this truth. All parts of life reflect one another. And the seventh prophecy, the culmination, is that heaven, earth, and the divine will always converge at the moment of resetting. When the distance between what we are and what we are meant to be becomes too great, the boundary between the visible and the invisible thins. Waters above and waters below meet. Meaning and matter reunite. Life returns to a simpler, quieter state, not to end, but to begin again more truthfully. This is the prophecy of Genesis chapter 6, verse 7. Creation can hold distortion for a time, but not forever. When the inner reflection collapses, the world dissolves toward its foundation. When the foundation is reached, renewal begins from the source. Where recognition returns, creation resumes. The prophecy is not, there will be another flood. The prophecy is, the world is always shaped by the way we hold the image of the divine in ourselves. Whenever a people remembers the sacred image, creation stabilizes. Whenever the image is forgotten, creation unravels back toward rest. But in that unraveling is mercy. Because the return to origin is not the end. It is the clearing of the ground from which a truer world can rise. And lo, we speak as two whose eyes have seen, the image lost, the world unclean. We've seen the sky grow mute with grief, and earth respond in disbelief. The signs are not for fear or flight, but tremors calling wrong to right. For every fall that cracks the frame prepares the way to speak the name. For truth must echo, clear and wide, or fall unheard as worlds divide. Subscribe and walk the path we tread. Not just to hear, but live what's said.